This is Time Signatures with Jim Ervin, a podcast and radio program presented by the Capital Area Blues Society in Lansing, Michigan.
Driving up and down these Michigan roads, yeah.
And now, here he is, your host, Jim Ervin.
Well, thank you so much, Parker, and welcome to Time Signatures. I'm your host, Jim Ervin, and I'm pleased to introduce today's guest. Now, if you look back in history, this gentleman's been an integral part of some really big names in the music industry. In 1964, he met fellow Hampton Bay pupil Brian May, and the two of them would form the blues rock band 1984. Now, this band played a supporting role for the likes of none other than Jimi Hendrix, as well as Pink Floyd. He and May left the band in 1968 in favor of academic pursuits, but the two of them would team up again to form the band Smile with drummer Roger Taylor. In the early 1970s, our guest handed off the lead role microphone to none other than a very young Freddie Bulsara. As history records, Bulsara soon changed his name to Mercury and the band's name to Queen, and the rest, as they say, is history. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Tim Staffell to Time Signatures. Tim, it's great to have you here, man. Welcome. How are you?
I'm very well, Jim. Thank you. And thanks very much for asking me on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you here. When I saw Jennifer put the pictures up and she had the shirt on. So let's get right into the discussion, Tim, because there's a lot to talk about. And for me, the best place to start is to ask you about your earliest memory of music. Where did that begin for you?
Well, do you know, for me, it began, I know it sounds crazy, but it began in the late 50s. Now, I was born in 1948.
Okay.
So 10 years later, I was at what we call primary school, kindergarten, I guess you'd call it. And even at that point, we were aware of skiffle bands. Is skiffle a common term? It may be an English. It may be an English term. It basically involved acoustic instruments, a bass made out of a tea chest with a broom handle and a piece of string.
Okay.
Banjos. It was kind of an early. I guess it was like a kind of hybrid of folk and bluegrass.
Okay.
But with an English touch on it, which is not always a good thing. But there was some fairly cheesy stuff came out of those years. But nevertheless, it was. But I think it was because it was. I think it was because it was family friendly that it came to my awareness, because it was not something. It was later on that music started to become culturally divisive between the age groups.
Sure.
But in those days, you know, and I mean, I'm a kid of 10 or 11 at this point. I'm listening to comfortable family shows. I don't think we had a television then, so it would have been the radio. But there was a show on a Saturday morning over here, Children's Favourites it was called, and it played everything from songs from the shows, Doris Day, Howard Keel, to skiffle, Lonnie Donegan, Johnny Duncan and the Bluegrass Boys, and things like popular opera and light classics. So that was my first total awareness of music as a thing, as it were.
Okay.
Before I decided that I wanted to involve myself in it. That was my first exposure to music.
Sure. Now, as you grew up and your musical taste evolved, were there any early influences growing up? Any favorite bands or artists, or maybe songs you just couldn't get enough of?
Well, the first single I bought happened to be "Return to Sender" by Presley.
Okay.
And let me see, and I think the second single I bought was "Runaway" by Del Shannon. Now I'm talking 7-inch vinyls in those days.
Sure.
And and so I was listening at some, maybe when the 60s turned, I was maybe listening to American pop, mainstream American pop. I'd grown out of the children's favorites era into, I was listening to Radio Luxembourg, which was a kind of, it wasn't exactly a pirate station, but it was not easy to get hold of. But I was listening to, you know, Bobby V, Johnny Burnett, Phil Spector, early Del Shannon,
Sure.
early American pop, Dion, you know, and then at some point along the line, I can't give you an exact incident, but at some time I became aware of the blues. Somehow, I mean, I think it was something that happened to a lot of us guys over here. Suddenly, we became aware of the blues. I don't know why, and that changed everything for me. I didn't immediately start playing the blues, although I suppose the thing is, and I've actually said this to my kids when they profess to want to learn an instrument. There's no better way of learning an instrument than learning a 12-bar blues. It's a ubiquitous format that's easy, and if you work out, you can do a whole set of 12-bar blues and be a performer. But apart from anything else, it gives you a grounding in the ability to be confident enough to play guitar, piano, whatever, and from then, yeah, and it's a stepping off point into music, the 12-bar blues. And I mean, when you look right back into the early days, even of jazz, regular 12-bar blues have been a feature of virtually every kind of music. It's extraordinary, really. But anyway, that was my introduction to thinking that I could play, was learning a 12-bar blues.
Very cool. Well, Tim, I want to flip the page here and talk about the early days in your musical journey as you began to play. You met Brian May in 1964. After then you enrolled in the graphics and drawing course in 65. That's where you met Freddie Bulsara. Had he taken the name Freddie yet? And were there any collaborations between you guys at that point?
Yeah, he was already Freddie at that point. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think I've got a feeling he was a late enroller at the college I was at. So I'd probably been there a year maybe before he came. Yeah, we kind of hit it off straight away because we were interested in the same music. Because at this point, there'd been an explosion of English music. The Beatles had established themselves. The Who had established themselves. It was on the up, and everybody was it was the cultural centre of London, which was, I suppose, Carnaby Street and Soho, was a focus for all sorts of kids of my sort of age, and music was the lubricant that kept us all together. I mean, music's a tribal thing, and I think, and the beginnings of tribalism in British music started at that point, I think, for young people. And with Freddie, we just dug the same things. And I was playing in Smile.
Right.
He had a band as well. He used to come to our gigs. We used to go to his. It was kind of social. It was social as well as musical.
Now, I wanted to ask you real quick. I forgot to request or mention this earlier. When you were playing with 1984, which was originally something that you and Brian had formed, you supported the likes of Hendrix and Pink Floyd. Those must have been some incredibly heady times for you guys, yeah?
Yeah, they were. there's a kind of a grey area between the end of 1984 and the beginning of Smile,
Okay.
during which I think mainly it was one of the reasons why Smile uh, became an entity anyway, was that as we all it was a five-piece band, 1984, and as soon as we graduated from high school and moved to go on to tertiary education, two or three of the guys were off to the provinces, so they couldn't stay around London, which only really left Brian and I. So that's
Okay.
why we formed. That's why we formed Smile. But before that, because Brian had started as a student at Imperial College. He was networking into the entertainments at Imperial College. So we got to play support gigs for all sorts of bands there because he was in the office and he could get us those support gigs. So
Sure.
that's how we supported Hendrix the first time. Floyd, we supported Floyd and Hendrix at an all night gig in, I think, gosh, it was either 67 or 68, uh, possibly, or maybe even earlier. Maybe it was 65 or 60. It was either 65, 66, 67, or 68. I can't
Okay.
quite recall. Um, but it was an all night gig at Christmas, which started at 8 in the evening, I think
Wow.
on a Friday night, finished at 5 o'clock the following morning. And actually, 1984 was the last band on. But that doesn't mean to say we topped the bill. We were just playing to the punters as they finally passed out. Yeah.
Wow. Now, what I have to ask you, what do you recall most about Hendrix and playing with Pink Floyd?
Um, that's a really good question. Um, it, it's that's a really good question because there's so much baggage that exists about Hendrix and about Floyd now
Sure.
that that it's sometimes difficult to separate out your own sort of attitude towards the music to the memory you had at the time. But the one thing I do recall is that those were the days when um, oh God, what's his name? What's the original singer from Floyd? Um,
You forgive me.
should pop,
I don't
it
know.
should it should pop straight into my mind. Um, uh, the original singer for Floyd, and I mean, I cite age as my inability to remember. The original singer for Floyd, who wrote "See Emily Play" and "Arnold Lane," and who's unfortunately no longer with us. In my view, was the core of Floyd, and
Okay.
personally, I've not really felt that they've ever quite emulated. Sid Barrett is his name.
Okay.
Sid Barrett was the original singer and writer in Floyd, and he wrote some wonderful, wonderful songs. And I personally have felt that they never really lived up to Sid Barrett's promise since then. But I'm in a minority, I know, because they're the hugest band in the world, or
Oh yeah.
one of the hugest bands in the world. As for Hendrix, well, he left a body of work behind that was. I wish to God he was around now.
Oh
I'd be
yeah.
very interested to hear what he was thinking. I think he would have become a jazz fusion player if he'd have survived.
Really?
I think so. Yeah.
You don't
I,
think he would have followed the blues road a little heavier or no?
no, I don't think he would. I think he would have. I
Okay.
think he would have become. Uh, I wonder who there is who's similar. Well, there's nobody who's similar. I mean, that's the answer. There is nobody similar.
True.
I'm just trying to think of I'm just trying to think of a modern fusion player who who is who is, shall we say, unrestrained in the same way that Hendrix was. Actually, I can't think of anybody, and that's really why I would love it if he was around now, because I'm sure
Sure.
he'd be playing up some extraordinary things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, mate, I don't know. I think he'd have got in with John McLaughlin. I don't think he doesn't play like John McLaughlin. John McLaughlin doesn't play like him. But I think that's the area he would have moved into. It wouldn't have surprised me if Hendrix would have ended up playing with Miles Davis.
Wow.
I think
That'd be a great team, man.
That would have been the dream team, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Tim,
God,
I'm gonna leapfrog back to '68 here,
Yeah,
when you
sure,
and Brian
sure.
formed Smile with Roger.
Yeah,
And of
yeah,
course, fans of the movie Bohemian Rhapsody remember your band Smile and the song Doing All Right being prominently featured. But as
yeah.
I've read, you actually introduced Freddie to the band. I'd like you to talk about the passing of the baton, as it were, because it's one of those things where I think Hollywood took liberties and told their story their way. But I'd like the straight story from you.
Well, effectively, I mean, I've no problem with the way they depicted it. They had time constrictions, so they had to
Sure.
condense everything into virtually an overnight occurrence. But
Right.
as I've said, Freddie had a band. We were Smile. He used to come to our gigs. We used to go to his. Eventually, I decided to move on because, uh, well, I didn't feel comfortable uh, at the end of the time. I decided to move on. And once I'd gone, Freddie went to Brian and Roger, as I understand, and with the game plan. And then, as you say, the rest is history. Freddie convinced them very quickly that he was the man for the job, and of course he was. Good heavens! I mean,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I have no problem in acknowledging his supreme um, effectiveness. He was the guy for that gig, not me, and I kind of knew that, which is why I left. And I mean, I'd been more interested in improvisational music, or music that allows the player to improvise, and that's not what they do. And but I'm in awe of Freddie's talent, frankly. Uh, uh, we didn't see how huge it would be at the time.
Sure.
It's all retrospective now, but my goodness me!
Yeah.
And then when the
Imagine.
movie
Imagine if.
came along, yeah,
Right.
I was well, I was humbled really by being included. I
I
mean,
think that I think it was important that they did include you because it was a piece that I didn't know about, growing up. I mean, I liked Queen growing up, but I didn't know the history, unfortunately.
yeah.
So it was
Well,
kind of a cool thing.
well, the thing is, the thing that I can't get out of my mind is the fact that every successful band there ever was had a guy who used to be in it. If you see what I mean, there was always
Yeah, true.
the Beatles had Pete
The fifth.
Best.
Yep. Yep.
There's story. I mean, Iron Maiden, I think, had a and then Deep Purple. There was a previous guy, and I always thought to myself, do I deserve this exposure really? But the fans are so kind to me. It's extraordinary. I suppose we've got that. There is that album, the Smile album, which for some reason the Queen management have decided that it's not to be available.
Hmm.
I mean, you can listen to it on YouTube and all, but it's not available on Spotify or any of the digital streaming platforms. I don't know why, um, uh, but um, and I suppose that because it exists, that body of work exists, and a lot of the fans have said there is a similarity between what Smile were doing and what eventually became Queen. Well, I suppose that's inevitable, since it was 2/3 of Smile
Right.
went into Queen.
Well, in that iconic harmonization between you guys,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but they made much more of it. I mean, we in Smile we were just singing regular type harmonies. But Freddie's originality and creativity took it to a new level,
Sure.
and I bow down before them. I really do.
All right, Tim, we're going to flip the page once again here. After your departure from Smile in the 70s, you took on a different type of work, getting into modeling, animation, design, and
Yeah,
most
yeah.
notably, some of the work that you did on the BBC adaptation of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and then
Well,
as chief model maker for the children's television show Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. I'd love to hear a little bit more about this story from you.
well, that's great. When I finally agreed when I finally threw the towel in as regards being a professional musician, and I had to, because my wife had been keeping me financially for a number of years, and the guilt was becoming unbearable. When I didn't really know where I was going to go with any kind of career, and it was pure chance that a friend of mine who'd taken a gig in a special effects workshop called me one day and said, "Did I think I could sculpt a figure of a man drinking a can of beer?" Now, I'd never done any sculpture before, but
Okay.
when someone asks you something like that, the rule is you always say yes. And so I
Sure.
said, "Well, yeah," not knowing whether I could hack it or not, but I did, and then and from that moment on, I was in that workshop for a period of 2 years, and during that time, we were taking crossover work from the BBC,
Nice.
and spillover work from the BBC. If their workshops couldn't manage, they'd throw it our way, and some of the stuff from Hitchhiker came into our workshop, which we worked on. There's also the story of the fact that I was approached by or the workshop was approached by Hypnosis, the album design company, to do the cover of an album,
Oh,
which
wow.
was a little sculpt of an alien, which I knew not, which I and I knew didn't know who it was for. I did the job. It went out the door. I got paid for it, and it wasn't until maybe 5, 6, 7 years later I happened to be around Roger Taylor's house to see the alien that I'd sculpted on his mantelpiece.
Oh, my
And I
goodness.
said, "What are you doing with that?" And he said, "That was the cover of my album, Fun in Space." And
Wow.
I had no idea, and neither did he know that I'd made it.
What a
So
cool
that's
story.
I've eaten out on that one a few times, I can tell
Yeah.
you.
Oh, yeah.
I've lunched on that one.
Very
But
cool.
then I'd been in that studio for a couple of years, and I got the call to go over to this. It wasn't so far away; it was quite local. Film studios, Clearwater Films in Battersea, and we were working on some pretty above the line commercials there for the next year or so. Um, quite. I don't know what you'd call them, gold standard products. They were, they weren't. They were national, global products. And then they managed to get the gig to do Tommy the Tank Engine, and I just got the job to be the supervisor, and I stayed there. I think it was the build and the initial day of shooting was about 18 months.
Oh, wow.
So we did that, and then they started, and I left at that point. But we established the style of it without a shadow of a doubt, because from that moment on, for the next 6 or 7 series, it was just using the same models that we'd built, adding
Nice.
one here and there. But yeah, so that was kind of almost, and it was so well paid as well. That was kind of the most fun job you could imagine, playing with Gauge 1 railway engines and huge train sets. I mean, what a buzz, and getting paid for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like being an overgrown kid, right?
Oh, crikey. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Well,
Yeah. That
Tim,
was-
your return to music in 2001 via the formation of the blues funk band Amigo. Did I
yeah.
pronounce that correctly? It's how it's
Yeah,
spelled.
yeah.
Okay.
Amigo. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
A band which reportedly drew its inspiration from folk, Latin, and rock. Now, as I listened to this album, I also got a hint of jazz, a little bit of a vibe of jazz in there. But something that caught my eye is that you re-recorded a couple of Smile items, including Earth and Doing All Right. Now,
Yeah.
both of these tunes featured your former bandmate Brian May on guitar and vocals, which, oh my God, as soon as I heard the guitar, I'm like, oh, that's Brian.
Yeah.
That had
Yeah.
to have,
Yeah.
that had to have been a special moment for you, yeah?
Well, I'd over the course of of my of the time when I was a musician, I'd played with several interesting people. Brian being
Sure.
one of them, Snowy White being another, Morgan Fisher being another, and so when it came time to make that album, I rang each one of them up and said, "Look, do you fancy doing some stuff on my album?" And they all did, except Roger didn't. I wish Roger had been able to do it, but he wasn't able to. But I had Brian on one track, two tracks. I had Morgan Fisher on a couple of tracks. I had Snowy White on a couple of tracks. But of course, Brian is the feather in the cap, as it were, and we treated Earth not a dissimilar manner to the original recording, but Doing All Right, I turned it into kind of a country tune, but I still enjoy the way it came out, and I really
Sure.
enjoy the way those two songs work on the album. Um, See, I didn't have, I wrote, I used songs from the last 30 years, plus a couple of new ones that I'd written. I mean, on that album, Stray and Country Life were written in the 70s,
Okay.
and Earth and Doing All Right were written in the 60s. Um, the Land was written in the 90s, and I think all the rest, oh, and The Land and Love of the People were written in the 90s, and everything else was written. Oh, Why Can't We Be Free was written in the 60s as well. So it was an
Okay.
eclectic mix of songs from the period of my musical activity. And because although when I packed up music as a profession, I was still playing. I was still playing in little bands here and there, on and off, evenings, weekends.
Right.
So I'd never given it up completely. It was just on the back burner.
Okay. Musically speaking, you really haven't slowed down either. You've since released two more solo albums, including your most
Yeah,
recent album, Wayward Child, which
yeah,
was released to coincide with your 75th birthday on the 24th of February. I believe that was last year, correct?
yeah. That's correct. Yeah,
And
yeah.
this work was recorded with your son Andrew too.
That's right. Well, Andrew was the drummer on all three of my albums.
Okay.
Um, and the great thing is, you see, that um, because I carefully brainwashed him as he was growing up into liking the same kind of music that I liked. Um, Actually, the fact that he and I share identical musical tastes virtually is a pure coincidence. I mean, it's just that he responded to what I like, and
Nice.
and so it became obvious that, and I bought him a kit of drums. He became very proficient, and it became obvious that he was the guy to use. And I haven't looked back. He's a great drummer.
How
He
cool
has
is
his
that?
own. He lives in Barcelona, as you probably know. He has his own band. In fact, I'm going over to. I'm going over. They've got an important gig coming up supporting Joel Saracula in
Nice.
in December. I'm going over to see them. So yeah, I'm still buzzing with it, as it were. Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's very cool. And it's so nice to have the ability to hand off that passion to one of your children. I've got three children of my own. The one rule that we had growing up is I would listen to your music if you sampled some of mine as well. And it's kind of cool because as fate would have it, I became fans of some of the people that they enjoyed, some of the bands they enjoyed. And of course, my kids got to enjoy and became fans of a couple of people that I listened to, like Ted Nugent. Um, I played Peter Frampton's "Do You Feel Like You Do" for my son Josh, and he became an instant fan. So that's always kind of cool.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that I can report the same. I can report the same experience. Uh,
very nice.
yeah, it's great, isn't it? It's when I compare my relationship with my children to my relationship with my parents, it's we just did not communicate with the same degree of intensity and depth that I communicate with my kids. I don't know if it's the same with you. Um,
Very much the same. Very
yeah,
much. Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
Tim, as we get ready to wrap up this episode, I want to ask you where people can go to find your music, your merchandise. I from what I'm seeing, you're out and about doing a little bit of playing once in a while here.
yeah.
Rumor has it you also have some art available. But as for all of this, with your music, are signed CDs available as well?
Yeah, yes, they are. My signed CDs are available in a couple of places. You can purchase them from Bandcamp, um,
Okay.
my Bandcamp page, or my Shopify page. Um, and uh, and I sign CDs personally, and I dispatch them from here.
Okay.
I've got a number of amusing T-shirts that I use a print on demand service. So if you buy a T-shirt, um, I can I can get it shipped to you quite easily
Okay.
anywhere in the world in a very short space of time. Um, I'm offering illustrated lyrics, both of Earth and Doing All Right, on my page. Each one is individually handwritten, and Earth is illustrated. What else have we got? Mugs. I've got smile mugs,
Yes. Yeah.
and and basically, and I'm also now I'm on Substack as well. I'm doing a regular blog on Substack, which is free, weekly free, and paid subscribers get a whole bunch more stuff, new tunes, little ideas, my
Okay.
ramblings of my crazy mind.
Well, we
But
will make sure to have all of those links put up on the information for this episode so people can reach out to you. And personally, I can tell you I've already planned to order the Amigo CD, the badge because I have a pin collection.
thank you,
And of course, I've got to have the Smile CD or shirt. I absolutely have to have that. And I promise you, when I get it, I will wear it on an episode occasionally too, so you'll be able to see
thank you
that.
so much, thank
But
you.
Tim Staffell, thank you so much for joining me today on Time Signatures, my friend. It's been an honor to talk to you today.
I'm very grateful for you to contacting me and asking me to do it. I'm very pleased, Jim. Thanks so much.
Well, it was funny because as I said, when I saw Jennifer's post and I saw the shirt and I saw who she was seeing, I went, I got to talk to this guy. And she immediately sends out a message to you and then puts me in there as well. I thought, wow, how cool is that?
Yeah,
You
she's
know,
great, Jen. It's wonderful. What a
she
wonderful girl.
is.
I mean, I've often wished I could go to Chicago. I've never been to Chicago, but
Oh,
she paints such a wonderful picture of Chicago that it's probably my only bucket list place in the world that I want to go to, but I haven't yet managed it.
well, I will reach out to you and I've got some photos because I did go to Chicago for a visit with a friend of mine for a few days. And the iconic differences between architecture in Chicago is what struck me most. You've got the new
Really?
and the old blended so well together. And I got a few pictures I'm pretty proud of. I'll share them. I'll share them with you.
Cool.
But if you ever
thanks.
get a chance, if you ever get a chance to go, you need to take advantage of that and go. It's something that don't go in the winter. They call it the Windy City for a reason. But I would absolutely go if you get a chance during Blues Fest or something of that nature
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
summer.
yeah.
So,
That's what I want to do. Go to the blues festival.
oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah, it was a lot of I have not been there yet. I've watched it on video and I've not been there yet, but that's another bucket list. Maybe we can plan to go together sometime. How's that?
Excellent. Good one.
All right. Well, that brings us to another close of this edition of Time Signatures. Again, my thanks to our esteemed guest, Tim Staffell, but most importantly, to you, our listeners, our watchers, subscribers, for without you, none of this would be possible. Jim Ervin reminding you that keeping the blues alive is everyone's responsibility, but preserving the history of the blues one story at a time is my mission. Until next time, so long.
Bye-bye, Jim. Bye-bye, everyone.
This has been Time Signatures with Jim Ervin, presented by the Capital Area Blues Society in Lansing, Michigan. For more information on cabs, visit capitalareablues.org. You can find this episode and past episodes at lccconnect.org. The Time Signatures theme song, Michigan Roads, is used by permission and was written by Root Doctor, featuring Freddie Cunningham.
You know I'm trying, baby, driving up and down these Michigan roads, yeah.
Until next time, keep on keeping the blues alive.